Welcome to another live episode of Pop Culture on Deprogrammed with Keri Smith. I am your host, Keri, here with my co-host, Mystery Chris. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I am good. For anyone who's new, Pop Culture is a show that we do where we take deep dives on Wednesday nights. We're toying with the idea of moving it to Thursday nights, but anyway, for now, Wednesday nights, 8 o'clock Central, we take deep dives into pop culture topics and we try and figure out how they influence culture, how culture influenced them. We look at them through a modern lens. And this is the fourth and our final in our spooky Halloween month series. Tonight, we are going to be discussing Satanic Panic, which, if you're a younger person, if you were born after the 90s, you didn't live through, so you may not remember it. So we're going to go through and kind of document a little bit what was Satanic Panic and try and figure out, did we learn anything from that period of history? I just wanted to put this on the screen. What you said, due to country people time, we will be starting in a few moments, I think.
Yes, country. That's what I meant. Yeah.
That's how I interpreted it.
You're an honorary colored person today, Keri.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit. Well, first of all, I've got one announcement. Two announcements. One, if you haven't seen it yet, I got to interview 5 Times August, who is a musician and a singer-songwriter who's been doing just a bunch of killer, not just songs, but music videos. And some of them I think you could characterize as protest songs, but as Davina or someone said in the chat during the interview, that's really kind of minimizing what they are. They're just amazing songs about the crazy times that we live in. And so if you haven't seen it, go check out that interview with 5 Times August and support indie music. Check out his music. He's amazing. The second announcement is we're going to try and keep this show tonight to an hour and a half because I promised Nina Infinity I would jump over on her Halloween show tonight. And so if you're still around and want to hang out at the end of this show, I'm going to be joining Nina Infinity. I think she's got John Talks on, and it's going to be her special Halloween show. So we're doing that right after. So we don't have any time to spare. So why don't you open it up with Satanic Panic? And first of all, why is this interesting to you?
I've always been interested in Satanic Panic. I don't have much memories of it, but I've been interested in doing a deep dive on it because it's something that I've kind of had these mixed feelings about. Because it's easy to laugh at people back then and how hyperbolic and sensationalistic they were being about so many different things. But living in the culture that we live in today, this wokeified culture, it's easy to kind of see how the seeds that blossomed into the flowers, these awful, deranged flowers that we have to encounter today, was being planted back then. And so, looking back at that time, I think a lot of people were reacting to something that was happening in terms of the culture being subverted, in terms of the cultural fabric being destroyed. And unfortunately, they kind of went with the most sensationalistic claims, which kind of turn people away from considering some of their talking points. But I do think that there was some truth. And again, I don't put a lot of stock in like, satanic cults and stuff. But again, I do think there was something deeper, darker happening within that culture, especially once you start talking about like the child trafficking rings, which there were claims of that in the 80s, Franklin scandal and other ones. But now you look back, from today's perspective, after all the revelations regarding Jeffrey Epstein came out and Catholic Church, a lot of that stuff doesn't seem as crazy now today. And so
Yes.
I
Isn't
just
that
want to kind
funny?
of, yeah, just look back on some of this stuff and from today's point of view and see if we think there's any merit to some of these wild claims.
Well, I saw a comment in the chat from Texas Sheep Lady, and I think that a lot of people here might share this sentiment because I have a lot of conflicting opinions about Satanic Panic now. And anyway, here's her comment. She says there are satanic things now, but the inoculation seems to have worked.
Well, I mean, like we're going to talk a little bit about heavy metal and stuff, and there were bands like, say, Slayer, which we'll talk about, that use a lot of satanic imagery, and they're doing it for shock value. I believe most of the time they didn't actually believe in Satan or whatever, but I do think they were trying to, piss off Christians. And this is
Yeah.
kind of a trend we've kind of seen throughout, the last several decades of these younger generations rebelling by rejecting the traditional values of the generation previous to it. And so I think there's a deeper question as to why do teenagers in general and young people tend to reject the values of the generation preceding it. Is that something that's innate to teenagers or not? Because I don't think it necessarily is, because teenagers hasn't been a demographic really in terms of being called teenagers for the last 100 years. It's only for the last 100 years which people have been using that term teenagers, because prior to that, teenagers were on the farm helping their parents grow their businesses. They're going to factories before the child labor laws came in place, before compulsory schooling laws came in place. And so you had a lot of young people who not only were being assigned responsibility in terms of jobs, there was also responsibility with families, because a lot of them got married very young and had kids
Yes.
very young. But nowadays, when that's all delayed, you have this growing gap between, teenagers not feeling responsibility in their younger years, still trying to figure out what they want to do, because the whole world was promised to them that they can do anything that they want, and many of them find out that they can't, regardless of how healthy the economy may be at any point in time. And
Hmm.
so I do think a lot of that has contributed to what we've seen in the last few years, but I don't know if it's necessarily something that's innate to teenagers to just want to rebel absent of, having to work and have some kind of responsibility.
Yes. Well, that's one part of it that's interesting. When it comes to satanic imagery that was in, or satanic references that were in popular culture at the time, in some of the music, as you mentioned, of the 80s and 90s. Um, the other fascinating thing to me about Satanic Panic has always been, it reminds you, of course, of the Salem witch trials, the moral panic that can spread through a group of people, children or adults, who suddenly all start claiming the same thing, and um, claiming things that didn't actually happen, and accusing others, and it gets larger and larger, and more people start signing on, and that kind of mob mentality, that madness of crowds, as I think Douglas Murray would call it, is fascinating to me, because I think we see elements of that in culture today, things you can point to among the woke, among the social justice people, and how these these claims become widespread. For example, the first thing that pops into my mind are the number of people who claim that there's a trans genocide happening. That's just, and they'll say it with a straight face, and the numbers of kids and young people who are now saying, "Me too, I'm trans too," and it's this sort of satanic panic. You could look at it through the lens of a social contagion among younger people, among teenagers, adolescents, in the same way that cutting became a social contagion, and eating disorders became a social contagion, but where there were more and more young people who were jumping into the same boat and saying, "Me too." Um, so that aspect of it has fascinated me for a while. And then I think it's also just because it's about something dark and lurid that's interesting to people. And uh, yeah, Helena says hysteria. Yeah, there's the element of hysteria that's fascinating to me. Um, why don't we start with the book that a lot of people credit with jumpstarting this whole satanic panic in the 90s and the 80s and 90s. And this book, it was a Canadian book. I've got two links here. There's the one you sent me. I'm going to pull up your link first because I want to show the cover, because it's just this great old cover. It was called Michelle Remembers. And this was a book that came out in 1980 or 1981. It was a memoir that was co-written by a Canadian therapist and his patient. And it was all about her so-called recovered memories of being tortured by Satanists. And a lot of people credit this book with starting the chain of events where we started to see more and more of these allegations in towns across not just Canada, but the United States and the UK, and children coming forward and mass numbers. Like, it would start with one accusation, and then they would start interviewing children. We'll get into some of the interview techniques. And then by the end of it, in the case of the McMartin preschool, which we'll talk about later, there ended up being 388, 400 kids who said, yes, me too. So here, let me switch to this. We can talk a little bit about this book. Some of the true crime people, or the people who are interested in this kind of stuff, will probably go out and get this book now and see what it was all about. This is an article from The Independent. A doctor helped his patient recall childhood torture by a cult. Their story sparked a global satanic panic. The publication of Michelle Remembers, a 1980 memoir co-written by a Canadian therapist and a patient who recovered memories of torture by Satanists, sparked international mass hysteria about child abuse and devil worship. A new film looks at the impact of the book on the world, and importantly, on the families of the doctor and patient, who became not only infamous household names, but also husband and wife. The same reason.
I guess he cured her or something.
Yeah, doesn't that go against some kind of code? Isn't there something, a code against that? Okay, I'm just going to read a little of this. For a time, they were everywhere. A Canadian psychiatrist and his soft-spoken patient, unassuming harbingers of doom at the hands of the devil. Larry Pazder and Michelle Smith exploded onto talk shows and into headlines after the 1980 publication of the co-written memoir Michelle Remembers, detailing the patient's so-called, they put it in quotes here, recovered recollections through therapy about childhood torture inflicted by a satanic cult. Here's a quote from Michelle Smith. Basically, what I remember was a 14-month period of my life at age 5 where I was given to a group of people whom at first I wasn't aware of what they were doing, other than to a child, they were adults doing things that I could not understand and that frightened me. They sacrificed animals and they used fetuses of babies in their ceremonies. She also said, I think today it's very, very wise to take a good look at where you place your children and into whose care you place your child, end quote. What followed on the heels of the book and the media tour was a hellish hysteria that spread across the world. Stories of recovered memories and vile abuse abounded, many striking eerily similar chords. There was talk of abduction, sacrifice, sexual abuse, and mind-bogglingly, even the use of, quote, baby wax made from murdered infants. Arguably most infamous were the 1983 McMartin preschool accusations in California. That's one of the biggest. We have several links on that one, and it followed. It was just 3 short years after the publication of this book, in which bizarre allegations of physical and sexual abuse, along with witchcraft and supernatural abilities, were leveled against the family operating the facility. Miss Davis and Dr. Pazder consulted on the case. So they wrote this book. Then there started to be similar allegations across the world, and they would actually get called in to consult on whether these allegations were true or not.
Kind of like a DIE officer. Like a consult, like I will tell you how to hire black people.
That's a great comparison. Yeah, you create the problem. Hey, there's a problem. It needs to be addressed. Hey, I address it. Okay. Here we go. The McMartin charges were eventually dismissed, and the Canadian authors of Michelle Remembers faded into the background, along with the worldwide Beelzebub brouhaha. But there was far more to the story, and a trail of broken lives left in the memoir's wake. Quote, there's hundreds of articles where Michelle and Larry, They're on TV, they're on radio telling their side of the story, and not a single person spoke to the family, says filmmaker Sean Horler, whose new film, Satan Wants You, premieres on Saturday at South by Southwest. Never before had they shared their side of the story. For the very first time, you will hear from Larry's ex-wife, his daughter, and Michelle's sister actually saying, wait a minute, this is what really happened. As the psychiatrist's ex, Marilyn, and daughter, Teresa, tell it, Miss Smith was a constant presence in their lives, even before the book, ringing at all hours and even following the family on trips. She's like a demented, what about Bob?
Oh, sounds like a good movie.
That's the creepiest part, following the family on trips. And then he left his wife and married her. Okay. Within a few short years of the book's publication, the pastors divorced, and he went on to marry his former patient. Okay. So it talks a little bit about the book and the filmmaker. Here we go. And it's quote, the book is shocking, truly, he says. It is a horror story. It is a religious horror story. The Pope's involved. They go to the Vatican. It's based on this 2 years of daily therapy where she is just reliving these childhood memories on Larry's couch, and they're recording it. And it's not just bad childhood memories. It's my parents are members of a satanic cult. They sacrifice animals. They murder a woman. They give Michelle away to the devil in a graveyard. This is the research starting point. Michelle, then married to a man named Doug Smith, had been treated for several years by Dr. Pazder before miscarrying in 1976. She called him for further help after having particularly vivid and terrifying dreams. Around the same time, his wife recalls in Satan Wants You that she and Dr. Pazder had seen the TV movie Sybil, chronicling a young woman suffering extreme abuse at the hands of her mother. We've covered this before because on this channel, when we talked about the spate, this is another ongoing, I guess you could call it a social contagion of some kind. But there are a growing number of young people, especially on YouTube, Tumblr, of course, where these things spread. There are a growing number of young people, of adolescents, of young adults who are claiming to have multiple personality disorder, or, that's what it used to be called. It's now called dissociative identity disorder. And they're acting it out on their YouTube channels and quickly going into different characters that supposedly inhabit their system, is what they call it. I have a system, and these are all of my alters. And we talked about this movie Sybil because, similarly to this book, Michelle Remembers, Sybil kind of sparked this entire wave of people claiming that they also had multiple personalities or multiple personality disorder. Sally Fields was Sybil, right? Yes, Kevin. So here we find that the movie Sybil allegedly influenced Michelle Smith, the co-author of this book, Michelle Remembers. Before he started on his book, I was at home and I was sitting there watching the show Sybil, and he said, I want to do the same thing, his wife Marilyn says in the documentary. He said, I don't want to be just an ordinary psychic. Psychic? Does she mean psychiatrist? I want to be famous, he said. I've got a patient just like that. And that's when he phoned her, and it just took off from there, says his ex-wife. As he treated Michelle under hypnosis, lying with her on the therapy couch. Oh, they were lying on the couch together.
Physical therapy, I see.
Physical therapy. And eventually, on a mat on the floor, the psychiatrist recorded her fragmented memories of horrific torture. He gave her the family's phone number, and she began ringing incessantly. Marilyn and Teresa recall how Michelle either hounded or followed them to family events and vacations. But, quote, he did believe her, Marilyn says in the film. There's no two ways about it. He believed everything.
She does sound possessed.
Possessed, yes. Possessed by something. Yes, I agree. So there's a lot more in this article. It's interesting. Here, I'm going to drop the link in the chat. We're not going to read the whole thing. But this is the book that many today credit with kicking off Satanic Panic. And then we started to see allegations, people coming forward. I've got a clip for you. I don't think you've seen this one, just because we like the old clips. Now, the sound on this, I think, is pretty bad. So if we can't hear it, we'll have to stop it, unfortunately. But we love old clips on this show, old news clips, and especially, I really love old Oprah clips.
What about new Oprah clips? How do you like those?
The old Oprah clips, she covered all this stuff that today seems like you would be shocked. She covered that. You know, like she had that when we did the true crime episode, she had Diane Downs on from prison. The woman who murdered one of her children and tried to kill the like she would have these sort of lurid things on the
I,
show.
I think it's probably like 80s and 90s talk shows that you like, those daytime talk shows, because there's a ton of talk shows from back then that had Satanists or people claiming to be Satanists on there, which I have some clips we'll get to later. But it was just amazing at just like how like crazy some of the guests they had on these shows, which made it entertaining. Like now it's pretty boring, or now it's just all gossip, or it's like the View or something, or they're just a bunch of hens talking about politics and having, I don't know, some Jonas brother or somebody on. Like, it's boring.
It's so boring. Yeah, who wants to see the Jonas Brothers? Okay, so this is an old Oprah clip. This is also from the 80s. This is towards the end of the 80s, 1989, where she had on someone who claimed to have also had these recovered memories of the, ritual, childhood ritual abuse, satanic ritual abuse. So let's see how good the sound is on this.
My next guest was used also in worshiping the devil, participated in human sacrifice rituals and cannibalism. She says her family has been involved in rituals for generations. She is currently in extensive therapy, suffers from multiple personality disorder, meaning she's blocked.
Look at that. That's something that it's overlapping a lot in some of these cases, is that you would find that the people making much like, going back to the fact that Michelle Remembers was influenced by Sybil, a lot of the people making these accusations, the people who had recovered memories, also said they had multiple personalities and dissociative identity disorder. Kind of interesting, huh?
Out many of the terrifying and painful memories of her childhood. Meet Rachel, who is also in disguise to protect her identity. You come from generations of ritualistic abuse?
Yes, my family has an extensive family tree, and they keep track of who's been involved and who hasn't been involved. And it's gone back to like 1700.
And so you were...
Right. I was born into a family that believes in this.
And does everyone else think it's a nice Jewish family? From the outside, you appear to be a nice Jewish girl.
Definitely.
And you all are worshiping the devil inside the home?
Right. There's other Jewish families across the country. It's not just my own family.
Really? And so who knows about it? Lots of people now.
I talked to a police detective in the Chicago area, and several of my friends know, and I've spoke publicly before. And
so when you were brought up in this kind of evilness, did you just think it was normal?
I've blocked out a lot of the memories I had because of my multiple personality disorder. But yes, I mean, it's like if you...
So she says she blacked out the memories. So they would have these, much like Michelle Smith and Michelle Remembers, they would go to a therapist or a psychiatrist, and under hypnosis, they would then recover, quote unquote, allegedly remember things they had not remembered before. And they would start remembering these things from childhood. And then oftentimes they would explain blacking it out by saying, oh, well, I also have multiple personality disorders and my other personality remembers it, but I didn't.
I could believe that these people were abused, not by satanic cults, but I mean, it makes sense as to why they developed multiple personalities and all sorts of other psychological issues.
or at least the belief that they have multiple personalities or
Yeah.
dissociative identity. I think some of them really believe they have it.
You grow up with something, you think it's normal.
Mm-hmm.
I always thought.
So what kinds of things? You don't have to give us the gory details, but what kinds of things went on in the family?
Oprah, can you give us the gory details? I mean, you don't have to give us the gory details.
Very nice and comforting way, please.
Please give us the gory details.
Well, there would be rituals in which babies would be sacrificed, and you would have to, you know,
Babies.
there were people who bred babies in their family. No one would know about it. A lot of people were overweight, so you couldn't tell if they were pregnant or not, or they would supposedly go away for a while and then come back. The other thing I want to point out, not all Jewish people sacrifice babies. I mean, it's not a very usual thing.
Calm down there, Tanya.
This is the first time I heard of any Jewish people sacrificing babies. But anyway, so you witnessed the sacrifice.
Right. When I was very young, I was forced to participate in that, in which I had to sacrifice an infant.
And the purpose of sacrifice is to what? Is to bring you what? What are you sacrificing for?
For power.
Uh-huh. Power. And so, were you ever used? Were you ever used yourself?
I was molested. I was raped several times.
And what's your mother doing
She's
in all of this? What's her role in all of this?
I'm not exactly what her role is. I haven't, recovered all of my memories, but her family was extremely involved. She brought me to it. Both of my parents brought me to it.
And where is she now?
She's lives in the Chicago metropolitan area. She's on the Human Relations Commission of the town that she lives in, and she's an upstanding citizen. Nobody would suspect her.
Were you raised with a sense of right and wrong, Rachel?
Yeah. I mean, it's like I had both. I mean, to the outside world, everything we did was proper and right, and then there were the nights that things changed, that things just got turned around. What was wrong was right, and what was right was wrong. That's what helps to create to develop MPD.
Multiple personalities.
Right.
Now, in your family, did you all call it worshiping the devil,
No,
Rachel? Or
I don't know.
it was just evil, these things you did.
Right. Well, I said it was evil, and they said it was good. There's a book that I had just come across called Lilith's Cave, which is a book of Jewish mysticism and supernatural, and there's a lot in that book that relates to what
This is an interesting comment. Hello Razmix says it's hard to tell if she believes what she's saying. I think she believes it. I don't know. That's my gut feeling on hers. I think a lot of people can convince themselves of a lot of things. And if I had to make a guess, like Mystery Christ, I would guess that she's definitely been abused. But that doesn't mean I necessarily believe that her recovered memories are accurate about cannibalism, child sacrifice, things like that. What do you think?
Yeah, she probably does believe that. Like, I definitely think she was abused. Because I've watched some other videos. There's one from Australia. I think it was their 60 Minutes, and they interviewed some girl back in the 1980s that had a very similar story about how she was a young kid who was sold in, or her family, I think she said her grandmother, like, essentially pimped her out to Satanists, and they molested her and did all these things. And she said she had a bunch of babies. One of them lived, the other ones they took and like sacrificed and stuff. And I tried looking into it, and I couldn't find any police reports or anything to substantiate her claims. I can believe that she was abused because, watching it, and it does seem like something happened, but some of these claims are just so far out that it's a little hard to believe that this amount of stuff could happen like that and there not be any evidence of it.
Yeah. In so many of these cases, there wasn't enough evidence of it. That's why you're going to see in the McMartin preschool trial, it was the most expensive trial in U.S. history at that point, and they didn't have any convictions. And then in the cases where people were convicted, they're still, even here in Texas, they're still exonerating people 30 years later because of the faulty evidence, the lack of evidence. Ryan says, I think she's just a con woman. Yeah, maybe. I can't, that's just my opinion. Maybe I think she might believe it, but who knows? There are certainly a ton of con women and con men. Go look at any of the dissociative identity disorder YouTube channels. It's full of young con people. To use a Justin Trudeau phrase, it's not gendered. Con people. Con men. Okay. Should we get into some of the cases? Or
Sure.
So the Kern County child abuse case actually happened. I think that was the first one. And I'm just going to pull up the wiki on this. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this one, but I did want to highlight this one because there is a Lifetime movie about this one that you can watch, and I've got the trailer for you. But this was a case in which 36 people. So here, I'll just read this. The Kern County child abuse cases started the daycare sexual abuse hysteria of the 1980s. In Kern County, California, the cases involved allegations of satanic ritual abuse by a sex ring against as many as 60 children who testified that they had been abused. At least 36 people were convicted, and most of them spent years in prison. 34 of the 36 cases were overturned on appeal. And here, in 1982, Alvin and Debbie McQuain's two daughters, coached by their step-grandmother, Mary Ann Barber, who had custody of them, alleged that they had been abused by their parents and accused them of being part of a sex ring that included Scott and Brenda Niffen. The Niffens' two sons also claimed to have been abused. No physical evidence was ever found. The McQuains and the Niffens were convicted in 1984 and given a combined sentence of more than 1,000 years in prison. In 1996, the convictions were overturned and the two couples were released. A television movie about the Niffens titled Just My Children was broadcast on Lifetime in 2001. Then there were 6 similar cases that followed quickly after in Kern County. And here, I'm going to pull up the trailer for this Lifetime movie, which you can watch the whole movie here on YouTube, I found. But I'll just show you the trailer. The other point I want to make about this is, even though I think a lot of the allegations, the specific allegations during this period of history, hold on, can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay. Even though I think a lot of them were fabricated, a lot of it involved this hysteria that we've talked about, this group madness where more and more children were being coached or led, were asked leading questions. And I think a lot of the allegations were false. I definitely think, like a lot of people now, I definitely think there are huge child exploitation rings all around this country. And we know at the highest levels of power, sometimes, which get covered up. And in the case of Jeffrey Epstein, for example, we never get any justice. We never get any justice. We never get to learn who the names were in his black book. There are powerful people who keep this stuff quiet. And while looking up information about the Kern County Satanic Panic cases in the 80s, I actually stumbled across several recent news articles and news videos about child sex rings in Kern County. So that gave me the impression you could pretty much put in any county and look up sex abuse case, and you're going to find a ton of depressing news articles about actual child abuse and exploitation happening today.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at the numbers, it's impossible not to conclude that there are powerful people who are involved with this. I mean, again, with the Epstein stuff that came out, but we'd all be naive to believe that that was the only big ring that exists. Obviously, there are more.
Yes. Here, I've got this one. This is from 2 months ago. I don't have it on the screen, but you can go and find the YouTube video. There's a local news station that has a report out from 2 months ago. 23 arrested in Kern County on suspicion of child trafficking. 23 people in a child trafficking ring.
Mhm.
What made these unique is that in the 80s and 90s is that they involved people that you would not expect. Many times it was the children's own parents, these middle-class suburban families, daycare centers, things like that. And also what made it unique was that the allegations went beyond sexual abuse and included things that are very unlikely, to say the least, but, like people flying and goats spinning around, and I just, all this crazy satanic stuff. Okay, here. This is the Lifetime movie trailer from 2001 for Just Ask My Children, which is about the Kern County sex abuse trial.
True story. When false accusations of child abuse
Who are these people?
They're in on it together.
tear a family apart.
Ma'am, you are under arrest.
You're making a mistake.
Scott Niffen? Yeah, you are under arrest.
A loving couple spends 12 years in jail.
Brenda, what is going on? Are you okay?
They burst into the house and they took the boys.
Two little girls tell lies and we're in jail.
Debbie and Alvin's girls are saying we did those things to them. I don't even know what some of those things are.
While two boys must fend for themselves.
Why did you say them? They keep us in the room for hours every day and ask us over and over until we agree with them.
Was it a mission to protect the children?
I know that people have been touching and hurting your body.
No.
Or a malicious prosecutor's relentless ambition?
What kind of monsters do these things to children?
Well, some of these charges do seem kind of unlikely.
Virginia Madsen.
If you want to get into it, just come on, because I've got nothing left to lose and I'm done taking your crap.
Yeah.
Get into it with me, girl. We'll be in peace.
I just like to see angry Virginia Madsen. So we don't have to play the whole trailer, but you guys can check out the whole film. Is, I think, for free on YouTube. Do you see any other similarities there with things that are happening today?
Yeah.
The thing that comes to mind immediately for me, in California, Gavin Newsom just signed a new bill that it changes the law so that children who express that they want to undergo so-called gender affirming care no longer have to provide evidence of abuse. They used to have to provide evidence of abuse, or at least make allegations of abuse. They no longer have to make allegations of abuse against their parents or to provide evidence of said abuse. They simply have to say that they don't feel unsafe with their parents and their parents will not validate their gender, and they can be taken away from their parents by the state to undergo this medical and surgical mutilation.
So taxpayers were paying for young children to get gender reassignment surgery in California.
Taxpayers, I believe, are paying for it. They're definitely paying for it for prisoners to do that, but the parents no longer have a say. It's up to the child and the government.
Yeah. I would expect nothing less from California.
Okay, let's move right along to the biggest case and the one that's always cited, the McMartin preschool trial. I've got a video on this one. Do you mind if I start with it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. This is actually from the failing New York Times. Hold on.
In what may become one of the biggest child molesting cases ever on record, 7 nursery school teachers were arraigned today on more than 100 counts of child molestation.
The accused include the preschool owner, 76-year-old Virginia McMartin, her daughter, and 2 grandchildren.
Finding out just what happened to the McMartin preschoolers in Manhattan Beach, California, would spark a national media obsession.
A case which has shocked much of Southern California and caused a lot of parents to worry about the safety of their children,
setting off a panic around the country.
In alarming numbers, preschoolers have been exploited.
Could it be your child?
The media blitz demonstrated unstinting belief that this had happened.
It was sensational and lurid and seemed to always be expanding.
1,400 children in this community have been ritualistically abused.
But were they? Decades later, while the McMartin case has been largely forgotten,
That woman there, 1,400 children here have been ritualistically abused. I think today she reminds me of the kind of woman that you see on camera talking about there is a trans genocide happening and these children will end themselves if you don't allow them to transition. Okay, there's a couple figures here in this case. Did you want to give a background on this case, or do you want me to?
Oh no, you know more about it than I did.
Okay, so the allegation started with someone named Judy Johnson, and what they did is they sent out a letter to all of the parents who also had children in the preschool, and told them that there's been an allegation of child abuse and an allegation of molestation, and to ask your children these questions. It made a famous figure out of the woman who was questioning the children, and I've got some stuff pulled up on her. She is the woman who, let's see, what's her name? Key McFarland. She's the woman who came up with the doll, the anatomically correct doll that we all know from today, from the memes and stuff, where people say, tell me on the doll where the meme hurt you, or things like that. She's the one who came up with that doll and came up with a way of interviewing children. She said that children were not likely to remember this kind of abuse, and so her method would help to bring forth these memories. And since then, of course, she's been largely discredited, or at least people acknowledge that the way in which she questioned children was planting ideas in their heads and was sort of like coercing them to say, yes, also me. So I've got some testimony from the trial that we can look at of Key McFarland. Here we go. This is pretty small. I'm going to try to make it larger. So she was the director of Children's Institute International, and she was the one that they brought in the McMartin preschool trial to interview all the kids who were in the McMartin preschool. And by the end of it, I believe it was around 380 or 400 kids who they were now saying had also been part of this satanic ritual abuse. So here's how she identifies herself. I am a social worker and a director of the Child Sexual Abuse Center at Children's Institute International. They go on to ask her about how she was questioning the children. So this is from the cross-examination by Dean Gitz. So he says, when the girl says she doesn't remember any naked games, you said, I know them all because the other kids told me. Do you think that puts pressure on Melinda to remember games that she might otherwise not remember? Her answer, yes. Do you think that having naked dolls with anatomical parts tends to suggest to the child naked games, naked people? Her answer, no, I don't believe that. You made the statement, every kid from the preschool came in and told me. Do you think that statement puts pressure on a child? Her answer, no. That to me, I just want to highlight that. That's crazy. And if those of you who watch this channel, if you're familiar with the Ashford, the Ash conformity experiments, even adults are susceptible to social pressure. And so the fact that she's saying to the children, every other kid told me this, absolutely influences that child to say the same thing. The Ash conformity experiments showed that adults would routinely pick, when they were asked to pick the longest line in a graph of different lines of different lengths, they would pick the wrong line if all the other adults before them did. Sometimes up to 70% of the time. because if they saw everyone else pick the incorrect line, they felt pressure to pick the incorrect line, thinking maybe they got something wrong or they're not seeing what they see, which is incredible. Adults do that. So of course a child would do that. So it continues. They asked her, you said that's why we wanted to use puppets. We wanted them to get real brave because more than 60 kids have come in and told yucky secrets. And every day more kids come in and tell us what went on down there. Do you think that statement might put undue pressure on the girl to comply with what the other kids said? Her answer, that statement was true. And they continue. And we found out all the scary stuff was just a trick to scare the kids, to make the kids think that somebody would hurt their moms and dads or hurt them. We found out. Doesn't that tell the child that something happened? Yes. In this interview, they get really bold here. They say, in this interview, you are the source of contagion. I mean, they basically call it a social contagion. You are the source of contagion, right? Objection, sustained. And then it continues. There's more of this. You guys can read through all of it, but the kinds of things she was saying to the children, some of those things are quoted here in the questioning. All the kids' mommies and dads now know what happened at the school, all the touching, all those sneaky little games. She would say this to the kids. Then they would ask her, before you said stuff like this, did the child ever say they were touched? And she says, I don't really remember. The mommies and daddies, she said, are so glad that the kids are telling. So things that were kind of psychologically nudging the child along to either please their parents, to please her, or to please other grown-ups and authority figures, to say what all the other kids are saying and what all the other kids said happened.
I put in the Jordan Peterson link. It's a short someone took from where he's speaking somewhere, and he commented on the preschool thing, and he had a very good response of how it spread. So.
Here, I've got this. This is one of those YouTube shorts, so it's hard for me to get it.
Yeah.
I've got it.
YouTube trying to be like TikTok.
I hate YouTube shorts.
I know.
When they were investigating the satanic daycare accusations back in the 1980s, the children would come up with absolutely hair-raising tales of satanic ritual abuse. Like, think, well, where did they get that? A child with a mother who is a paranoid schizophrenic or bordering on it would start to get delusional about what people might have been doing to her child when she left them in the daycare. And then, being disturbed, she started to bother her children. It's like, does anybody do anything to you? And children partly construct the way that they react to the world by looking at whether what they say grasps the attention of adults. The child would be struggling to find the words that would satisfy the mother's curiosity. And then they'd go to sleep at night and have a dream. And the dream would get nightmarish. And that's because the dream was trying to model what it is that the mother was calling forth out of them. And then police would come in and they'd investigate, and they'd get even more grotesque and catastrophic fantasies out of the kids. And then they'd think, well, the kids couldn't be inventing this, but they weren't. They were co-inventing it. When they were investigating the satanic daycare accusations back in the 1980s, the children were absolutely hair-raising tales of.
Yeah, he is correct. And when he points out that it was oftentimes, one parent who would start these panics at a particular preschool in the 80s and 90s, that was certainly the case with the McMartin preschool. So I mentioned that it all started with the allegations of a parent named Judy Johnson. Now, Judy Johnson was eventually diagnosed with schizophrenia, and she also died of alcoholism-related causes in the middle of the trial, I believe, not that long after she made the allegations. But here are just some of the examples I'll put on the screen of things that she was saying. So these are notes from an interview with Judy Johnson. Judy Johnson, the parent who first reported an incident of sexual abuse at the McMartin preschool, continued to contact the district attorney's office to make new and increasingly bizarre charges. The following notes are directly taken from a summary of an interview with Johnson as reported by the deputy district attorney. So this is one of the reports that she made in February 1984. She says, Billy describes having communion in a church. A prayer similar in sound to the Lord's Prayer was recited. A goat climbed up higher, higher, higher. Then a bad man threw it down the stairs. It woke up later. Ray poked Peggy at the altar. Lots of candles. They were black. Ray picked his right pointer finger. It bled. Ray put it in the goat's body part. Nobody had clothes on under the robes. Billy had a robe too. They put a Band-Aid on his finger. Old grandma played the piano. Lots of threats were made against Billy and his family. It is unclear whether it was a doll or a real baby. Billy says it was a real baby, but the head was taken off and other parts of the body were burned. Billy said Peggy, I'm not reading all this out loud because I know the YouTube rules. Billy said Peggy then killed the baby. Peggy had scissors in the church and she cut Billy's hair. Billy had to drink the body. Anyway, we're going to stop reading it, but it gets crazier and crazier. And it's just sort of these disjointed ramblings about goats on the ceiling and people flying and staples and animal parts and just more bizarre. The more time that went on, the crazier her allegations got. And during the trial, they started off with several allegations. Let me see if I can have the exact number here. It was an incredible number of allegations. Okay. So after they had interviewed all the children and asked them all these extremely suggestive questions, leading to these accusations, they had a total number of 360 kids who said yes, that they had been a part of these things, that this had happened to them. By the time they got to trial, that number had dwindled to 41. Only 41 would eventually testify. At first, they were prosecuting a whole list of 321 counts of child abuse, including they were prosecuting these accounts that they were using these accounts of satanic ritual abuse. By the end, they had gotten rid of they decided to drop all the charges that they were prosecuting on, because this was a very years long trial. It was like I said, it was the most expensive trial at that point in U.S. history. And by the end, they were just prosecuting on 2 counts of child abuse. And they didn't get any convictions in the end.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Okay, I'm trying to think if I should show you. Yeah, let me show you just one more clip. Here we go. This is a little bit about Judy Johnson.
My name is Judy Johnson, and I want to report a crime.
Judy Johnson was the first person who had reported any kind of problem at the McMartin preschool.
Judy Johnson was suspected of being an alcoholic.
I had my investigator spend time with her, and he came back and told me what she talks about from moment to moment makes no sense.
She never became a real part of my defense because I didn't know she had, perhaps schizophrenia and drinking problem, because they hid it. So the idea came about, and I generated as much as I can. I think we need to see this witness.
She called me the day before she was to testify, saying she did not want to come into court. I tried to assure her we would protect her, would make sure she was comfortable. I tried to do everything I could because we needed to have her come in. And that night, she drank herself to death.
Yeah. So it was. She didn't even end up testifying because she died of alcoholism-related causes.
Wow.
Just as the trial was getting kicked off. This was a 3-year trial. 3 years of testimony. And here are the results. This is a good summary here. On January 18th, 1990, after 3 years of testimony and 9 weeks of deliberation by the jury, Peggy McMartin was acquitted on all counts. Ray Buckey was cleared on 52 of 65 counts and freed on bail after more than 5 years in jail. So he spent 5 years in jail during this trial. 9 of the 11 jurors at a press conference following the trial stated that they did believe the children had been molested, but the evidence did not allow them to state who had committed the abuse beyond a reasonable doubt. 11 out of the 13 jurors who remained by the end of the trial voted to acquit Buckey of the charges. The refusal of the remaining 2 to vote for a not guilty verdict resulted in the deadlock. Ray Buckey was retried later on 6 of the 13 counts of which he was not acquitted in the first trial. The second trial opened on May 7, 1990 and resulted in another hung jury. On July 27, 1990, the prosecution then gave up trying to obtain a conviction, and the case was closed with all charges against Ray Buckey dismissed. He had been jailed for 5 years without ever being convicted of committing any crime. There are so many of these. That's just the biggest one that most people talk about or remember. If you are a younger person and you weren't around during the 90s, you may not remember any of this stuff going on in the 80s and the 90s. You said at the beginning you didn't really remember this.
No, yeah, I don't know much at all about it.
I remember a lot of the news coverage. But here, I've got just one example. As I mentioned, even here in the state of Texas, they are still exonerating people who were convicted in these Satanic Panic daycare cases, or these small town cases. 30 years later, this is from this year, 2023. This is just one such case here in Texas. And this is, I pulled this up from Texas Public Radio. After 30 years, a father is exonerated in Satanic Panic case. There's a picture of him right there on the right. That's Melvin Quinney. With a few strokes of a pen, Judge Christine DePrado dismissed the case against 74-year-old Melvin Quinney, giving him his good name back. Applause broke out from onlookers in the same court that 32 years ago had convicted Quinney of indecency with a child and sentenced him to 20 years. This was the final courtroom step in Quinney's exoneration, a painful journey that saw him spend 8 years in Texas prisons, forced him to register as a sex offender, and saw his 4 children pushed into the foster care system. Now the same court and his family say that the abuse never took place. It was all based on a lie stemming from a, quote, moral satanic panic that swept the country, said Innocence Project of Texas Director Mike Ware. And then they kind of talk a little bit about the Satanic Panic. In the 1980s and 90s, a mass hysteria swept across Texas and the nation around the satanic ritual abuse of children. According to a 1992 FBI report, hundreds of victims alleged thousands of offenders had killed tens of thousands of people as part of what is now called the Satanic Panic. Even in 1992, when the report was generated, they called the allegations bizarre and unfounded. But the allegations persisted, and several people being falsely imprisoned. Notable exonerees include the so-called San Antonio Four and the Kellers. Like other exonerees, Quinney should be entitled to compensation from the state. It isn't immediately clear what the final number will be, but it will be a stretch. It will stretch into the hundreds of thousands of dollars or more. And then for his case, for anyone who's interested, Quinney's now deceased ex-wife, Deborah, along with therapists, pressured his 9-year-old son, John Parker Quinney, to testify that his father had molested him and that he was in a satanic cult and that he had seen children murdered. In court documents, Parker said initially his sister Sarah was the focus of his mother's molestation claims, but then shifted it to him. He resisted testifying at first, saying he had no memory of the abuse. This was the kid, the 9-year-old. But therapists specializing in the now debunked satanic ritual abuse theories used what current law enforcement officials call outdated and inappropriate interview techniques. Quote, children were being coerced by ill-guided professionals to make these outrageous, demonstrably false accusations that have now been proven false beyond doubt. Parker began to believe he was part of a satanic cult and that his father was in and had been abused. He says, Whenever I had any doubts that something had happened, I was told by the therapist that this was because I had multiple personalities.
Mm.
That my dad had programmed me this way, Parker says. His dad went to prison. This is him. This is the son today. He didn't get to spend life with his 4 kids, all because of an ex-wife who manipulated and took advantage of this satanic panic that was sweeping the nation and used it to punish the father in custody court. I imagine was the original intention, was to get custody, and then this guy went to prison for pretty much his whole life and missed out on his kids growing up, and when he did get out, had to register as a sex offender, and this very much reminds me today of the parents, mostly women, not always, but mostly women, who are trying to, quote, unquote, "trans" their children and using the transitioning of their kids in custody cases with the ex-husband to try
Yeah.
and get custody.
There was a big case here in Texas where what was the guy who was trying to prevent his child from being taken from it in the court, and did he get arrested? Didn't he get arrested?
I believe he did.
And like the media was, saying he was such a terrible, evil guy, and it was like he's trying to protect his child. Like he's not some kidnapper who just wants to like do terrible things to these kids. He's like,
Jeff Younger, that's his name if anyone
Mhm.
wants to look him up. I couldn't remember. Jeff Younger. Yeah, that's still ongoing as far as I know here in Texas.
Jeez.
Similar thing. The mother, you've got the officials, you have therapists who are all saying this, yes, this absolutely, in the case of satanic child abuse, yes, this absolutely happened. You just don't remember it because you have multiple personality disorder, but it totally happened. And in what we're seeing today, you've also got therapists and many times the mother who are saying, yes, you are the opposite. You were born in the wrong body.
What do you think is the motivations of that? Do you think it's ideological or more financial?
I think it's both. I think if you look at the Satanic Panic case, like this case, for example, and then you look at some of the ones that involve child custody today, I think that you have sometimes a manipulative, possibly personality disordered parent who is willing to do and say anything to try and get child custody or to punish their ex-spouse, and is willing to even go so far as to try and convince their child that they were part of a satanic ritual abuse ring, or to convince their child that they are born in the wrong body. So I think people take advantage of things that's what I'm saying is I think they see, oh, this is one way I can do it now. This is what's happening right now. I can be a part of this too.
But for the psychologist, do you think it's monetary? You think that's their motivation to make money? Because they're basically saying, oh yeah, if you give me some money, I'll testify in court saying, oh yeah, this child believes that they are in fact a girl, and I agree, and we need to give this child gender reassignment surgery because it is harming her health.
I don't know if it's the money. I mean, doctors are definitely making a killing off of it because once you've trans that child, you have a patient for life.
Mm-hmm.
So it's big for the doctors. It's big for the pharmaceutical industry. It's definitely a factor. But I also think you have a lot of therapists who themselves might be considered part of a cult, the cult of gender identity, of gender theory, and they're learning this stuff in med school now. So I think a lot of them believe it. They believe, some of them probably believe they're doing what's in the best interest of the child. If you look at the whistleblowers who've been coming forward from a lot of these gender clinics for children, a lot of times the whistleblowers are themselves in the so-called like LGBTQI plus umbrella. A lot of times they were in that business. They were working in these child gender clinics because they thought they were doing the right thing and they were helping kids, and they only came forward and blew the whistle once they saw that was not the case, and they became alarmed at what was happening. So I do think there are people who push this stuff, therapists and doctors who push this stuff, who probably do believe they're doing something good. Here, I'm going to stop sharing that one. You guys, give it up for the mods in the chat. We've got Robert Lowry here tonight. I saw Cheeky Mare. And now there is a pirate in the chat. Hello, Pirate Tom C. He just gifted 10 Deprogrammed memberships. Thank you so much. I should have said at the top of the show, if you like the show and want to subscribe, you can do so. If you want to support us, you can do so at Locals, or here at YouTube, you can become a member, or Patreon, or Subscribestar. Thank you so much. Tyler Turducken says, destroy Satan by smashing the like button.
Destroy Satan.
Cool. Okay, what should we move to next? Because there's so many of these. We can't spend too long. We have like 15 minutes left. We can't spend too long. And I know. Let's switch gears. There's so many of these the cases, the daycare cases in the 80s and 90s, and the people who are being exonerated. We just gave you some highlights. If you're new to this topic, especially if you're a young person, you can go and check out some of this stuff. But we're going to switch gears and talk a little bit about pop culture, because I know you prepared a lot of links.
Yeah, so let's go into music. And so while you pull up the link, I think it's that first one. I was going to briefly talk, we don't have time to talk about it, but I was going to talk about some of the murders that have been linked to Satanists. One of the big ones is the Ricky Cascio incident case, whatever, where this teenager by the name Ricky Cascio in upper state New York, I think it was, in 1982, he and two of his friends were out in the woods getting high off angel dust. Like, who does angel dust? I don't know. But he ends up stabbing one of his friends while they got in a fight. And he allegedly, according to the other friend who witnessed this, was, screaming, hail Satan, all these other things, and telling the kid that he was stabbing to like worship Satan or something. And the kid ended up like running away, but Ricky chased him and stabbed him to death. And so Ricky ended up ending his own life a couple of days later. But people believe that this was inspired by Satanism. And there was a slew of other cases that came afterwards where people were either alleged to be Satanists, or maybe they actually kind of were dabbling in Satanism, or at least the pretend version, whatever people want to call it. And so that became a really huge thing in the 1980s. And that kind of leads into talking about music, heavy metal, because many people believe that heavy metal was inspiring some of these killings, and also some of the self-deletions, or people ending their own lives. And so yeah, that's Ricky Cascio there.
You can see his AC/DC shirt. There was a lot of panic going on about young people, teenagers, adolescents and heavy metal music at the time.
Yeah. So let's move to the first clip. There we go. I think that's it.
Okay.
We'll find out.
That's the focus tonight of Lonnie Lardner's special report on Satanism. But we want to warn you now that some things you're about to see and hear might be too graphic for children. Lonnie.
Well, Terry, authorities tell us that the most serious, or perhaps the most dangerous kind of devil worship comes in the form of underground cults. Most of them are very secretive, usually organizing clandestine rituals in the dark of night. Well, those ceremonies sometimes involve the sharing of animal blood to gain power, they say, but cult members believe their strength really comes from secrecy.
There's secrecy that keeps us powerful.
And power, according to this man, is what true Satanists are guaranteed. Police and Sheriff's Department investigators say satanic cults often find that power in animal sacrifice. Photographs support their theory, and some self-proclaimed devil worshippers tout it.
The animal would bleed to death. It was painless because the knife was always very sharp if you could cut it right. When the animal would remain alive.
Can you pull up the second clip? That one gets a little bit more into music.
You know what I find so interesting? I'll just say this quickly about Satanists, because this person in the shadows here is the supposed Satanist. Is we've talked about many times on this show that the social justice, the woke ideology is centered around power That's what they worship. The whole ideology, if it's in their definitions, racism equals prejudice plus power. Sexism equals prejudice plus power. When a woke person, a social justice warrior dies, they don't say rest in peace, they say rest in power. The whole ideology is basically saying that the best way to look at the world is as a struggle for power between identity groups. We need to redistribute power among these different groups based on identity. And so the whole thing is sort of, what do they put at the center of the belief system? It's this reverence, this worship of power. Satanism, same thing. He just said it. They get power from these. They think they get power from these rituals. It's about worshiping power. If you look up definitions of Satanism, they'll tell you that it's not actually about worshiping. They say it's not actually about worshiping a conscious entity named Satan, but it's rather about worshiping this power within each human being that can be tapped at will.
Excuse for hedonism. That's what it is. Because I was reading a little bit about Aleister Crowley, and who was a cultist, and then Anton LaVey started the Church of Satan, and Michael Quino, who started his own branch of that religion, put down quotes. But it was very clear to me that many of them, while they don't believe in these entities, some of them I think do believe in a little bit, but it's very clear that they all just wanted to be hedonists. Like, they all had orgies, all this sex stuff and drugs. It was just, they're selling this freedom from restraint, that was symbolized, I think, by Christianity. And that made a lot attracted to this by tearing down, again, like we were talking about earlier, where you just see this blatant disregard of tradition. And I'm not somebody who believes that people need to adhere to tradition just for the sake of adhering to tradition. But as a famous conservative commentator once said, before you tear down a fence, you should know why it was put up to begin with. And there are a lot of reasons why these institutions were put in place. And if you disagree with aspects of that traditional institution, then suggest something better. But that's not what we got. We just keep getting all this deconstruction, all this embracing of taboo subjects, middle finger to traditionalists and anybody who held any values that could be tied to the country or that culture that existed long before that person was born. Like, those things had to be disregarded. And this worshiping of the self, like we were just talking about, takes, precedence.
Yes. We're going to have to do, because this is about Satanic Panic, but we're going to have to do, even though it's a spooky topic, maybe we'll wait a while to do it, but I really want to do one with all the research you did on Satanists. I want to talk about Satanism and how ridiculous it is. Can we do that?
Yeah, we can do that.
At some point, let's do that. How bullshit it is. I'll say that. Okay, here, let me switch tabs.
So this should be, once you get past that ad.
Oh, it's an ad. You guys.
You've made a lot of money for YouTube. Why can't they just give you an account that doesn't have ads?
An ad blocker on YouTube, and then it stopped working. I don't know. It would. Okay, here we go.
That's what we are.
Satan. No matter how you slice it, it's not the heavy metal bands like Black Sabbath and Kiss that are losing money in the current record industry depression. In fact, some new groups seem to be picking up that satanic smell of success.
Oh, I believe he said Satan sells.
And following along in its path.
The Lords of the New Church can be taken obviously a variety of ways in terms of the title and what it might imply and what their name is. First of all, I question how many of these bands truly have a satanic motive, and I think that what goes on with anything is that once the issue is brought up, people tend to try to look for those things, and they'll try to place it, and they'll say, aha, I see that that's implying some sort of a religious or satanic overtone.
I think that within the rock music field, you've got people who really are into the occult and into Satan. And then you've got some who probably are playing games. But no matter how you cut it, they're propagating Satan. They're propagating the demonic line, the occultic world. And I think it's a devastating thing on our culture.
We cut it out there. Oh, yes. But one of these bands in particular was Slayer. So Slayer was one of the bands that purposely used, satanic imagery to rile people up. And that was a huge appeal. Like the more pushback they got, the more popular they got. And so if you go down to that Slayer section and just play just a bit of this clip of a Slayer interview, and then I want to get it to the link below that, which is an interesting twist, I guess, to Slayer's story. So Kurt Loder.
Album Seasons in the Abyss. Slayer's morbid lyrical preoccupations are nothing new, but Edgar Allan Poe never caught anywhere near as much flack as these guys do. Are they serious? Let's find out.
Ooh, this is evil, man.
It's heavier than heavy metal, faster than speed metal. Slayer is death metal.
Every day I'm on stage to release from me. That's why I'm so mellow.
And it's a really good release of aggression, you know?
Slayer. It's pretty crazy. I mean, I heard people chanting Slayer.
I just wanted to show a little bit of that. But yes, so Slayer made a huge name for themselves in the 80s, very popular band. Their lead singer, if you pull up this next link, ironically enough, is Catholic.
Really?
Yeah. So I can never say his name, Tom Araya. He was raised Catholic. I think he's Chilean by birth, but I believe his family moved to the States when he was young. And over the years, he kind of was a little wishy-washy on his statements regarding his, religion or faith. He said things like, yeah, I'm not like super religious, but yeah, I think there's a God. But now he seems to be, now that Slayer's kind of retired and he's put it behind him, he seems to be embracing that, Christian aspect of, his identity. And so he's made some comments about that. And if you want to read a little bit of what he said in that interview right there, please.
Is there a particular part of this you wanted to look at?
If you scroll down, so let's see. So there's a.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah, right there. Yeah.
What's the biggest misconception people have about Slayer? He says, the obvious one, the Satan stuff. I'm not here to fault anybody, and I hate to say this, but Christ came and taught us about love and doing unto others. That was his preach. Accept each other for who we are, live peacefully, and love one another, period. And then they ask him, do you believe in God? And he says, I believe in a supreme being, yes, but he's an all-loving God. And then they ask him, can you see how people might miss that message in your music? And he says, yeah. And I don't fault them for that. Songs are open for interpretation, It's like we can both be looking at a flower, but the information that we absorb is different about that flower. And then the interviewer says, but Slayer is not about spreading the love. And he says, Slayer's about what we enjoy, putting together some really cool songs, like on God Hates Us All. Okay, so he just says God loves everyone, and then he says, like on our song God Hates Us All. They're like, is it possible people might misinterpret you that you believe God loves us all? Yeah, because I have a song called God Hates Us All. He says there's some really good stuff in there lyrically that just blows my mind. That's something that intrigues me about what I write. The serial killer stuff is like, what thought process led you to this? It's like everyone has been asking for a sign. The Twin Towers were an effing sign. Actually, September 11th, 2001 was the release date for God Hates Us All. We did a midnight signing at a Tower Records. They had 3,000 kids there. We were supposed to fly out the next day and start a tour in Europe. Oh, this is interesting. Any prophetic lyrics on that album? He says, yeah, on Disciple, pessimist, terrorist, targeting the next mark, global chaos, feeding on hysteria, cutthroat, slit your wrists, shoot you in the back. Anyway.
Yeah, so like he didn't write most lyrics. I'm not sure if he wrote any songs at all, but the guitarist, I believe it's Keri King's his name, who's like the militant atheist, he's the one who kind of took the satanic imagery and kind of incorporated it with the band and made it cool and stuff. But I don't believe any of them are like actual Satanists or anything. But I do believe that, again, the founding was to kind of, that's the aesthetic of the Satanist stuff, was to kind of anger and rile up Christians and stuff. And that's what it did. And it sold a lot because a lot of people love that. In fact, when I was looking up quotes of the lead singer about his Catholicism, I was finding all these message boards of Slayer fans going like, wait, he said that? F him. Like,
they didn't like it.
No. Like, what a poser. I'm like, do you actually think they're Satanists? Come on.
Wow, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
That I just love in this interview, he's like, I believe in God. Of course, God loves all of us. What do you think people might interpret that? Maybe. I have a song called God Hates All of Us. Oh, ladies and gentlemen, my husband, Anthony Garcia Music's in the chat. I just saw this. He says, man, all those metal dudes are harmless nerds. LOL.
Oh, yes.
So funny.
But I know we're running short on time. I'm trying to see here because I had some videos of the Parent Music Resource Center.
What section is that under? Is that up above?
So yeah, that's a little bit above that. So where it says D. Snyder, if you want to pull up that, I have it marked at the moment. So Parent Music Resource Center was this committee of wives of congressional members in the 1880s that were raising concerns about the influence that music was having on teenagers, that it was very sexual and violent and encouraged people to, end their own lives. And so they had these congressional hearings where they brought forth a number of musicians. Dee Snider, Twisted Sister fame, was brought in front of Congress to testify. Frank Zappa and John Denver, oddly enough. And all three of them were saying this is an issue of you guys trying to censor this music is a violation of the First Amendment, and that the music is part of people's free expression, and that parents need to do a better job of policing what their kids hear instead of telling these artists that they have to not talk about certain things in their music. And so Dee Snider, which, as much as I don't like him now because he's kind of an idiot, he actually handled himself pretty well in these hearings. And so I queued it up at a moment when he's being questioned about some of his lyrics.
Dee Snider, it's a shame what happened to him because he's a total corporate big pharma whore.
Yes.
He is one of these crazy COVIDiots who I call him that because he deserves it, because the things he says about people who chose not to get this experimental jab that has not been around long enough for longitudinal studies. It is a very reasonable decision, not to revisit this all again, a very reasonable decision to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to wait until this has been around long enough for me to know what the long-term side effects might be.
Mm-hmm.
And the contempt with which he has treated those of us and his fans who did not get that big pharma shot is despicable. And he is a moron on Twitter, if you guys follow him there.
And that's what's so sad about a lot of these musicians and people you thought were against the system are totally for the system, want more government, like Rage Against the Machine. You thought, oh, these guys against the corporate, controlled government. It's like, no, they all support it as long as there's a Democrat in office.
Okay, let's listen to him back before he became a total sellout pharma whore. Oh wait, he's muted. Good. I'm kidding.
You're gonna take that.
We are gonna take it. We are gonna take it.
I must say, I love that scene in Pee-wee Herman's Pee-wee's Big Adventure, where he's in the backlot of Warner Brothers and he sees Twisted Sister doing that song. You're gonna burn in hell. Don't you see no evil?
He's also one of the morons who continued to speak with contempt for his audiences and for people who didn't have the vaccine only allowing you to come to his concerts if you had gotten the shot, even though he admitted he still got COVID after getting the shot, like almost everyone.
Ability to write about things that you can stand behind. I feel myself to be a moral person, and I think that I have a lot of positive things to tell people about. And everything, like I said, on my records, I will stand there and say, yes, I wrote those words, and this is what it meant, and this is what I was trying to say, yes.
Do you think that parents, not only those who are in PMRC, but other parents who are concerned here and across the country about the development of new trends in music and the lyrics that go along with that music are naive or somehow missing the point? Do you think that they're unduly worried about some of these developments and writings about sadomasochism, suicide, rape, other things? I mean, do you think that's really not that serious a problem for this country and our young people?
That's like sort of a multiple question. I don't think they're naive, and I don't think that at times they're unduly worried, but I do think sometimes they take it overly serious. I mean, there are monster movies on all the time. They've been going on for ages, and people watch a monster movie and they get scared and they walk away, and it was just a movie. Rock and roll, and many times, is the same thing, trying to get an effect either of laughter, of sadness. A lot of the heavy metal bands are trying to scare people and just make them just like a horror movie. Vincent Price isn't getting have problems because he's done all these monster pictures. He's just an actor. I'm not going to say I'm just an actor, but I am entertaining people, and a lot of these bands are entertaining people. And when they were reading some of these lyrics before, I couldn't help but laugh. I mean, I hadn't heard some of them, but some of the lyrics were ridiculously ridiculous. I mean, you know, and a kid, even a kid reading that, I think would go, oh my God, what's going on? You know, it's ridiculous. The only word I can think of. Some of the lyrics.
The vehemence with which you attacked Senator Gore's wife, I detected sort of a defensiveness somehow on your part, sort of a lack of unsureness of where you stand in this. Why did you feel it necessary to attribute some of the qualities to her that you did? Why was that important to your testimony?
First of all, I wasn't attacking Senator Gore's wife. I was attacking a member of the PMRC. Okay, I was
Senator Gore's wife by name.
No, her name is Tipper Gore, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't say the senator's wife. I said Tipper Gore. Okay. Secondly, defensive. I've been working very hard. I believe in the music I play.
Yeah,
I believe we have a very.
I love this comment I put on the screen by Rogue Asagi. Says young D. Snyder would really hate the old D. Snyder. Yes, if he only knew. That the musician I got to interview, by the way, this week, who I mentioned at the beginning of the show, 5 Times August, has a new song out called Ain't No Rock and Roll. And he directly goes in on musicians like Dee Snider, Twisted Sister, who the Foo Fighters, Rage Against the Machine, who basically abandoned all of what they used to say were their principles once they got on, you know, the fame and money teat, the big establishment teat.
Always happens. I think about like music back then and now. I do think music does have an influence on people's perceptions. I think all media does, but when it comes to like violence, I think if you're someone who's already kind of messed up, then I think it can have a disproportionate effect on you. Like rap music, like hardcore drill music, or gangster rap. I think a lot of Black people from inner city, you know, big cities, who are listening to drill and other stuff, I think a lot of them do take that to heart because a lot of them grew up in violent households, you know, usually raised by single mothers who used violence to manipulate them and to get them to do what they want. And so a lot of them think that violence is the way to get people to do what they want, and they don't know how to negotiate. And I think it manifests itself differently from somebody who's well-adjusted. Someone can look at horror movies or listen to rap music and gangster rap music and not feel the need to go shoot up a bunch of people because, you know, they don't have these violent psychopathic tendencies. But I do think music, regardless if people are well-adjusted or not, I think it tends to have an effect on people's attitudes towards sex and sexuality. And I think because that's a lot easier for people to gravitate towards, because we all have that sex, you know, urge. I mean, unless you're asexual, but most people do, and so I think it's a lot easier for those type of media to have effect on shaping people's perception. And I do think because of that, that can lead to people having households that are broken. You know, if you're having loose sexual morale and become a single, mother or sometimes father, it can lead to violence within that household, which will lead to people who are then disproportionately affected by violence in media.
I think so too. I think we could do a whole another night on some of this stuff.
We're not even get to Dungeons and Dragons.
I know. Could we do? Let me propose this on air. We don't have to do this, but what if we did an odds and ends episode where we catch up on some of the stuff and the links and everything we had prepared for tonight's episode and maybe some of the other episodes from Spooky October?
Yeah, we can do that.
Would that be fun?
Yeah.
Okay, or we can at least think about it, because I feel bad. I told Nina Infinity I'm coming to her Halloween show, and it started 42 minutes ago, and so I got to jump over there. I'm going to have to wrap this up early, guys. I'm sorry. Thank you for hanging out with us tonight. Thank you for supporting Deprogrammed and for being a part of our Wednesday night pop culture crew and keeping us laughing in the chat. And we also have to show, we're going to do a follow-up episode with Odds and Ends, because I saw this from Justin. Hello, Justin Peterson earlier, who said, I remember when the preachers played records backwards to show us the satanic messages coded in the music. Mystery Chris has prepared that for us. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say I have links, and we're gonna listen to a bunch of different songs with supposedly messages in them played backwards.
Okay, we're doing it then. I really want to do some of the stuff we didn't get to cover tonight. We'll figure out how we brand it. Yeah, Anthony Garcia Music says, yes, let's do it. Okay, carry over to November. Why not? Let's keep having October the best month in November. Okay. And Odds and Ends episode sounds great, says Razmix. Okay, cool. I want to do, because the backwards music stuff we didn't even get to, the Dungeons and Dragons stuff we didn't get to, and
funny stuff we didn't get to.
Funny stuff.
Tattoos we didn't get to.
Yeah, we're gonna have to do it. Do it because it's Halloween themed. Yes, of course we will. Okay, cool. Therese, fun topic, Keri. Thanks, MC. See y'all later, chat.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just put up a post on the community page today because a lot of people didn't know, but Mystery Chris is not just one of my best friends and the co-host here at Pop Culture and a brilliant mind, but he's also a talented artist. And he is the person who designed our avatars here for Pop Culture. And he also did these special Halloween graphics that we've been using all month. Look, here's mine. You can see it. And I wanted to show them off because a lot of people didn't know that, but I've talked about it before. I guess some people missed it. He's an amazing artist, and
well, thank you.
Yeah,
I try.
And I was at your place recently because you watched Little Tiger for us, and I was just reminded of what a great artist you are, because you guys, his place is full of these museum quality art installations. Like you could go and I'm not exaggerating, and I don't use hyperbole. You could see these in a museum better than what's in most museums probably. And they're on such interesting topics, different topics throughout history, and you can build anything. So what you see here, the Halloween art, that's just what you do online, the digital stuff, but you're a multimedia artist and really talented. So, okay. I had a good time hanging out with you.
You as well. Yeah. At this point, we didn't get to all of it, but we'll make it up. We'll
make it up. Yeah. LPJ, Keri, real quick, can we get an update on the raccoon? So I don't remember if you heard the last update, but I did catch another neighborhood cat in the live trap. That's 2 cats we've caught. We have not caught the raccoon. We thought he was out of the house and we boarded the holes up again, but then I think I heard him the other day. I'm not sure. So maybe he's got another way of getting in that we don't know about, and it's really distressing. Can't wait until all the porch and all the holes are fixed, because it's just weird when you hear another creature living in your walls, like it's like Just please get out.
Do something, Tiger.
Anthony says the raccoon's pretty much gone. Yeah, babe, I think I heard him the other night. I didn't tell you yet because I don't want it to be true. But we'll see. Yeah. But anyway, yeah, he's crafty. If he is there, he's a crafty little fella. Okay. But we haven't heard much from him. Okay, I've got to go. Please join me on Nina Infinity's stream. We're going to be talking about spooky topics, and we'll see you guys on Friday for live Kerfuffy break. This has been another episode of Pop Culture.
Bye.
Bye.